everybody. Terry Brown, all bass, no bull. And, I guess I'm starting to really feel old. Um, it's kind of funny, the guys that I'm running around here watching tournament fish and do all that kind of stuff. It's not the old guys anymore. It's these young guys that are catching them. And I'm going to have one on today that has really been catching them the last 8 years. And that's Matt Becker. Matt, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
There you are in all your glory with all the trophies behind you. I look at young guys who have a career now in fishing, and everybody wants to blame it on this live scope and all that stuff, but you could catch them in a mud puddle, and it's very obvious that that's really what's happening here. And I think that this ultimate tournament that you just had down at Gunnersville, kind of living proof of that. Tucker Smith wins that thing 500K, and the beauty of what happened there is that couldn't use scope, couldn't use live scope. So, it's funny. I'm talk to you a little bit about what your thoughts are on this, but when we had flashers, which you're probably never ever saw one before, never.
Oh, I have.
When I started out fishing, we used a stick. All right, so you put it in to feel how deep it was, and then when you got past the stick depth, you knew it was whatever the length of the stick was. But then you went flashers, then we went to LCRs, then we went to LCDs, and no one said a word. Not a stinking word, anything that we had any of that stuff come out. Then we go to side, down, side scan, side imaging, whatever, and down imaging. No one said a word. The minute we got this live picture now, everybody's having a stroke. And I think that it's important that we have leagues now, and I want your opinion on this. We have leagues now that you don't have to use it. You get to use it a period at a time, you get to use it a little bit. Even BFLs are going to start using it just a little bit, 3 hours a day or whatever the new rule is. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that's made that significant of a difference for the young guys, or what's your thoughts?
That's such a polarizing topic. It's so everyone has their opinion on it for sure. I mean, my opinion is it has as much to do with the young anglers spending time on the water and being dialed into everything they're doing than it does the technology. Like you just said, we took it away for this Ultimate Angler Championship, and look at the guys who still did well. Most of those were still the same guys that are doing well with or without the technology. So I hesitant to say that the technology is everything that makes these younger anglers doing well, but you can't argue the power of it for sure. And what I don't like to see, I'm kind of in that weird spot where I'm kind of in between. I'm 33 years old, so I fished without it and I fished with it now, and I feel very proficient with and without it. But I'm in that weird spot now where it's like, I don't really care either way. Like, just tell me what the rules are and let's go do it. I enjoy fishing with it. I enjoy fishing without it. So it's let's just go fishing. That's what it's about,
Yeah, I do. And, I've been using it since it was Panoptics. And even though I'm old, I still think that it's a pretty valuable tool. But I can tell you that, fishing, in tournaments around here, which is Central Illinois, has had very little bearing on the fact that you could, you throw a bait out there and you watch the fish go get it and that kind of stuff, as much as it does finding fish offshore, finding them on a brush pile, and the characteristics of what these fish do. Even the most adamant person who doesn't like it will tell you they've learned a ton about fish habits and that kind of stuff just by having it. And would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no arguing, the amount of information you can learn on, fish behavior and just, watching fish interact with your bait and interact with your boat, just your presence. There's no denying how much you can learn about that. I could see the people getting frustrated with it is, it kind of makes some fisheries one-dimensional, where you have to be doing one thing. You have to be, throwing a minnow or a drop shot or something like that at these fish that are roaming in order to succeed in tournaments. That's the only, gripe that I can understand from people, is it really narrows down some fisheries and some tournaments per se, that you kind of have to be doing one thing if you want to do well in the event. But most fisheries, that's not the case. It's honestly the minority that is the case where that's what you have to be doing. A lot of fisheries, it's wide open. You can do whatever you want. So, I kind of understand that side of things, but, like you said, there is no denying the amount of information you can learn just from, having it on your boat, not even making a cast, just looking at it on your boat, just trolling around looking. You can learn so much about fish behavior that then you can apply that to fishing without the technology. And that's kind of what we've seen here on the Bass Pro Tour last year with the limited one period with sonar and two periods without. You're seeing guys take the information they learned from that one period with the sonar and then apply it for the next two periods, not using the sonar and still catching those same fish, but they're using that information that they learned from the sonar.
Well, it's funny. Yamamoto, I kid them all the time. Crispin's a buddy, and I kid him all the time that the Senko, when it came out, made a lot of crappy fishermen better fishermen.
Yeah.
And that thing is an unbelievable tool. There wasn't any complaining about it either. But the big deal is that one particular bait. I know guys that go out that couldn't catch a cold, and they put on a Senko and they're pretty good. They're pretty darn good. And then they start they start learning the little nuances and that kind of stuff. But in reality, I think that you've got to, when you're a fisherman, you got to use the tools you're allowed to use, whether it's one period, half a day, 3 hours, whatever. And if it's legal, then that should be okay. And you got to figure it out. If you don't know it, you better learn it. Better get on the water.
That's right.
You mentioned something earlier about time on the water, and I think that it's really important to note that these guys, the young guys now in particular, are on the water all the time, and I think that's really a key element to this.
No doubt. That's the number one thing that, makes a better fisherman is just spending time on the water. And, we're really seeing that, we have, I say we bass fishermen as a whole have always preached that, take your kids fishing, get kids into fishing, and everything has just gotten younger and younger and younger here over the last few years. And I think it's going to continue to be that way. We have, high school tournaments, youth tournaments, college tournaments, all that stuff. And these younger anglers are taking it so much more serious at a younger age and getting hooked on it and, really doing everything they can to succeed, much like you would see in other sports. If you just compare it to any other sport, if you take, say, baseball or football player or whatever, I mean, they're training from an extremely young age to get to be a professional by their 20s. So, you're starting to see that kind of transition into fishing where these kids are getting into it at a much younger age, taking it much seriously and, spending as much time as they can on the water, learning, how fish set up, all the different techniques, all that sort of stuff. And then the other side of it is all the content that's available now. Anyone can pull up a YouTube or, a podcast or whatever and learn so much quickly and then go apply that on the water. So when you combine all that information being out there and, kids taking it more seriously and spending more time on the water now, you're seeing the benefits or the rewards of all of that come to fruition right now with all the anglers doing well.
Well, it's funny. I helped start Illinois fishing at high school level, and there was no such thing. There wasn't any federation stuff. There was really, the kids couldn't fish. The first 2 years, I called them squirrel hunters because they were in the trees more than they were in the water, right? Not anymore. These kids are sticks. And it's because they were ate up. They're getting ate up like we were, like I was. I picked up everything I could possibly pick up and learned and read and watched TV shows and did all that kind of stuff. Now you've got so many more tools. You just mentioned that, to be able to learn a skill or learn a technique that you couldn't do before. And I think that helps as well. It makes that learning curve shorter. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yes. Yeah, the learning curve is way shorter than it used to be just, 10 years ago, not to mention 20, 30 years ago. So, that's, you're seeing that play. And then, it's a combination of all these things kind of swirling together that, the young anglers are so good right now and better than they've ever been. And I can only imagine what the next generation after that's going to be like. I mean, it's incredible.
Well, I was sitting here looking at your tournament shirt. I did a little research on you, trying to figure out all the ins and outs of where Matt Becker'd been. And I look at your tournament shirt and all my buddies, I'm like, God, did you get a resume from me, or how did this work? Because you got Jim and I, that's Brad Raymond. You got Fish USA, Nick and I talk all the time. You got, and I want to talk about Suzuki a little bit, but Yamamoto, and you got Mark Pizer at the Trick Step. All
Yeah.
these different people that I have an affinity with all these guys, and it's pretty cool. Even though I'm old and been in this business a long, long time, that's made me smile to see that shirt, and it's kind of like we are at the beck and call. Unless you're independently wealthy, you're at the beck and call of sponsors. And if you don't have good sponsors, you can be the greatest angler in the world, but you can't afford to do it because you're not everybody hits a home run every time they get up, unless you're Otani, and then he does every time he comes up. But the rest of the people in the world don't. So you have to have those rely on those good sponsors. And I know with Fish USA, they've really came into the bass fishing world in a big way. And I know that when I talked to Nick, he mentioned you many, many times about working with you and trying to figure out how to do things better and some of that kind of stuff. But talk about sponsorship, if you would, and how did you field all these great people that you've got on your tournament shirt?
Yeah, that's like you said, that is the most important side of what we do as far as tournament anglers. Everyone sees going out and catching the fish in the tournament, winning the tournament, or whatnot. But that's one guy that week. You got how many other guys that are there that maybe didn't cash a check or just trying to get by, and they're relying on the sponsor side of things. So it is equally important as the fishing side of things, and that's something that I strive myself in, is to be, just as good off the water with the sponsors as I am on the water while I'm actually competing in the tournament. So, the biggest thing for me, it's all about relationships, that a lot of my sponsors are, continuing year after year and continuing to build those relationships and basically turn into friendships. It's, they're family. Yeah. They literally turn into family, and, it is very easy to support those people and promote those products when it's somebody that you care about, you're friends with. Like I said, they're essentially family to us, and it's stuff that you believe in or you've had a hand in developing or coming up with. I mean, it's but like you said, it wasn't always that way for me. When I started, I didn't have a clue about anything. I was so green when I jumped into the tournament scene. I had won a tournament and won $40,000, and that was basically my way into professional fishing. And I used that money to pay my way for the next season, and basically started with no sponsor help, and kind of learned my way through that. Took a couple hard years of not really any sponsor income, and then slowly built those relationships. And I feel like that really helped me, because it made me really appreciate when a company was willing to work with me, that I knew I had to hold up to my side of the bargain and really make sure that I was valuable to them. And in turn, as my success grew and my brand grew, they also recognized that, and stayed with us, stayed loyal, and supported us along the way. So yeah, like you said, we've got a great lineup of sponsors. I'm super proud of them, and definitely, if any of you guys want to check them out, or need anything from them, please look us up and support them if you can.
It used to be when I did these interviews, and I've done them for a long, long time, but it used to be that I used to say, "Are you a power fisherman? Are you a finesse fisherman? Are you an offshore guy? Do you like to flip and pitch?" All those kind of things. But you have to be versatile now. And I mean, if you put yourself, let's say you go to any lake in the country and you get to do what you love to do the most, what would it be?
That's a tough one. Like you said, nowadays you can't really be one track minded. You gotta be able to do everything. I hate to be cliche, but I would say top water is probably the best. If I can catch them on top water, whether that's a big walk in top water, or a little popper, or a frog, something on top water. If I could do that, that's probably the way that I would prefer to catch them. But to be honest, if they're biting, I'm probably going to be throwing whatever it is that they're biting. So I feel like I can excel at just about any technique. So whatever it may be that's going on that time, I feel like that's what I'm probably going to be doing.
Well, it's funny you mentioned top water, which I think if you'd have to be dead or near death not to love that bite. I mean,
Yeah.
straight up. if you're out there and you're throwing, I don't care if you're throwing a clothespin, if a fish comes up and eats it on top, you're going to throw that clothespin till your arms fall off. And I think that's the kind of things that get people into fishing. I believe that those kind of things are what we have to do with our kids. Take them somewhere they can catch something. Number one, if you just go out there and you run around in the boat, they're going to get bored with that real quick. But go someplace you can catch one. One top water bite, one can change a whole outlook on a young man or a young lady.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
really cool that you mentioned that. I think that's really one of the neat things that's important to note is catching is what it's about. Fishing kind of sucks, but the catching part, it's the deal, right? That's where we
Yeah.
want to be is the catching part. You mentioned to me before we got on this thing that you were from Pittsburgh, which is the biggest suck hole I've ever been to from a fishing standpoint. My buddy Aaron Martins, and I loved him to death. He lost two fish that probably weighed pound 11 or something, and he won the classic, right? And but he was on the right fish and could have won. But the river system there, is it getting any better? Have you heard anything from back home? I know you don't live there anymore, but have you heard anything more about that area up there? Is it getting better?
Yeah, so it actually is a fairly good fishery now. Now you're not going to catch any big weights, big bags or anything. A 2 pounder is probably a pretty above average fish there now. But really, I was probably what 13 years old at that classic, 12 or 13 years old when the classic was there in '05. So I was pretty young, but really in my memory of the fishery there, that was some of the toughest times it's ever was. It was consistently better than that from then all the way, till I moved here to Tennessee just a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. So it was continuing to get better, and now it is it's good. I still keep in touch with a few buddies back there, and definitely stay in touch with tournament results and stuff. And they that they continue to catch them. It's a really cool fishery, and it's a place where you get a lot of bites. Like I said, you're just not going to catch any big ones. There's not going to be any big bags weighed in there, but you get a lot of bites, a lot of fish, and you're seeing everybody come in with limits now, which is really cool. And lot of fish, a lot of bites, and it's fun way of fishing. You're catching smallmouth a lot of times on top water, like I said. Throwing soft plastic jerk bait or a popper, buzz baits, things like that. I mean, it's fun ways of fishing, and you catch a lot of fish. So definitely miss it a little bit, but I enjoy where I'm at. It's definitely better for the job, the profession. As a professional angler, I'm a little more central in the country here. I can fish all year long, and I can go out on Watts Bar and learn a lot more techniques than I could living there around Pittsburgh.
Serious gear for serious anglers. DD26 delivers tournament-tough performance you can trust. From the front to back of your boat, DD26 has you covered. DD26. No shortcuts, just badass American-made gear.
It's funny because I said it was a suck hole, but I live in a state where it's a suck hole.
Yeah.
I live in Illinois, right? We have done everything except make it so you can go out and have one fish. We've got 3 fish limits. I think we had one all year on a Tuesday nighter. It's just terrible. And what happens is you can make great fish, but it all comes down to habitat. And I think
Yeah.
that's what happened at the river systems there. I mean, we've got the Illinois River here, which they used to have a few tournaments on Superstars, and some of them were there. But, and they caught good weights. 12, 13, 14 pounds is a good bag. And I'm sure that's the way it is in Pittsburgh too. But I want to make sure I mention something really important is that the people in Pittsburgh are wonderful. They are unbelievably great people. And I think it starts with that. Sabine River is not the greatest place in the world to fish, but the people show up in droves. And I
Yep.
think that's what we have to have in our sport to grow our sport too.
Yep, totally agree. The fans are what makes the sport for sure. Without them watching or supporting the tournaments or the TV shows or whatever it may be, that none of it would happen. So the fans are everything, and the Pittsburgh fans are definitely passionate about their whatever they like. So it's you see that in all of the sports for sure. So I would honestly, I would love to see a tournament go back to Pittsburgh now and really showcase what it's become. Everyone has this, like you said, everyone thinks that it's what it was in the '05 Classic, but it's much better than that now. Like I said, there would never be any big bags. It would fish very similar to like a Sabine River tournament if it was a 5 fish limit, but that's fun. That's exciting. And like you said, it's all about, the the fans showing up, and it definitely would show out. So I would love to see any tournament go back to Pittsburgh, whether I'm fishing it or not, just to, for the sake of watching it and the area and the fans, for sure. That would be cool.
Well, I'm kind of a purist. I mean, I love everything, but I like a tough tournament.
Yep.
If everybody's catching them, then you got to catch bigger ones, right? That's the way it works. But if you go out there and you figure something out and you can catch 5 every day, I love those kind of tournaments. I love fishing them. I love being around them. I love watching them. I love watching the gears work in you guys' heads. I think that's important. But I think that sometimes we go to these, like Gunnersville. I mean, I think you could, catch a 20-pound bag there almost every day if you wanted to. And it seems like that those are kind of boring to watch a little bit, and I think that's kind of been the knock on live scope to a certain extent, is it's not as much fun to watch. But I can tell you that those hard grinders, those ones where you got to grind, you got to get at it, you got to go out there and work twice as hard, I think those are kind of fun. And as a fan, number one, I love to watch those kind of tournaments.
Totally agree. As a fan, I would much rather, even as a fisherman too, being in the tournament, I would much rather a tough tournament than a slugfest, because it makes every bite so much more important. And then if you do catch a big one, whether a big one's a 2-pounder in that fishery or a 3-pounder, 4-pounder, whatever, when you catch a big one, it means so much more than, in a slugfest. So I'm totally with you. I prefer watching and fishing in the tough tournaments.
Let's talk about the leagues a little bit. You got BASS, you got MLF, you got NPFL. All these different leagues are all shifting around and changing things, and up, down, 100 people down to 51. And then you got one period where you could use forward facing. You got all these things are happening. This is, I call the silly season. It's like in NASCAR, right? You have all this stuff going on. You've made a home in MLF, and you've done very, very well there. Are you excited about what you're seeing happen there? Is it something that you think is going to continue to evolve? What are your thoughts on what's going on at MLF?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like MLF has a lot of momentum right now. Things are heading in the right direction. I'm extremely happy with everything where I'm at, everything I've done. For me, it's all about, I mean, it's a business. Let's be real. It's a business, and I choose to take my money to Major League Fishing, and I've been loyal to them pretty much my whole career. And basically, I look at the numbers each and every year. If there was a better option for me, dollars and cents wise, entry fee versus payout, whatnot, I would try to get to that level. But for right now, the Bass Pro Tour has the best payout by far. If you make a top 10, you're making over $20,000, which is just ridiculous. So, for me, it's all about that. Like I said, this is a business. It has to make sense financially. You can't be blinded by egos or, this name or that name or anything like that. For me, it's all about the business side of it. And that's where I feel like, gives me the most value for myself and my sponsors. And then in turn, you look at the entry fee versus payout numbers. And, I feel like Major League Fishing has knocked it out of the park, and really all the leagues. So that's just something that, I chose. And like I said, I review that basically every year and continue to, if I need to make a move or anything. And I've never once felt like I've needed to do that. So extremely happy with Major League Fishing. I feel like the format was a big hit this year in 2025. So I'm excited to kind of build on that and build the momentum going into 2026. And then, a lot of cool things going on there with like the team series events. Those are a whole lot of fun. And I feel like the fans really enjoy watching those and engaging with those. So that's something that, I'm excited to continue to grow with. And it's the top 51 anglers in the world for the 2026 season. So I'm excited with the smaller field, the increased media coverage, and just continue, hopefully just catching a bunch of bass next year, and, continuing to succeed with MLF.
You got Jacob Wheeler and Dustin Cannell just won another team series deal. I think you're going to have to ban those two guys fishing together. I think that, they've done pretty well, and by themselves and together. One of the things I think is important to note here, I used to tell kids, take a white sheet of paper, sort of what you're talking about financially, take a white sheet of paper, draw a line down the center of it, put the pros on this side and the cons on this side to wherever you're fishing, whether it's BF, whatever, and write those things down, because it's not a cheap sport. You've got to have a boat. You got to have a tow vehicle. You've got to have equipment. You've got to have all that. Electronics playing so big. And if you do that, at least you're going in with your eyes open. And I think that's what you said.
Yep, that's a very important factor, and I always suggest the same thing to everyone. I'm like, just like actually sit down and look at this, and like don't just be blinded by one thing or the other. Like you have to look at it as a whole. Look at what it's going to cost you, the entry fee versus the payout, and be realistic with it. You're not going to win every single tournament, so you can't bank on $100,000 or whatever it may be every single tournament. So you got to look at like the last place check or something like that, just to kind of factor into planning out your year and be realistic with it. But I totally agree. Any tournament angler should sit down and look at it and choose what the right place for them. You kind of touched on it with the sonar stuff. Even right now, there's a place for everybody. If maybe you don't like how one tournament organization does it, well, there's probably a home for you somewhere else. You can go fish somewhere else. That's kind of what we're going to see here. I feel like we've started seeing that over the last couple of years and continue to see that as everybody kind of shuffles around and finds their home and what they like, what makes sense to them, or where they're happy. That's kind of what I want that for everyone. I want everyone to be fishing where they enjoy it, where they're happy, and what makes the most sense for them or their business.
It's funny. About 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, Helen Sevier owned Bass, right? And I told her one day, I said, we need a Legends trail. We need an old timers Legends trail where they just go out and yuck it up and have a good time. But the fans would be for the fans as much as it is for the guys fishing, right? Maybe make a 4-hour day. I don't know what you have to do. But anyway,
yeah.
And now I'm hearing rumblings, and I think it's going to happen. We're going to probably have a Legends tour. And I don't know if it'll be 5 tournaments or 3 tournaments or whatever. But I think that's another thing is we've got age group. You can't get too old to fish. You can't, unless you die, and then you can't fish anyway. But you know what I'm talking about. It's a thing where it may be the only sport that you can compete from the time you're 15 to the time you're 80. And I think it's really cool. That's the neatest thing about our sport. It's a sport of a lifetime. And, that's why I really would like to see this Legends deal. Get Larry Nixon back out, George Cochran, Denny, all the guys that I grew up following. Tommy Biff, all the guys still fishing, but you know what I'm getting at? Have a Legends tour. And I think it's going to happen. I would be shocked if it didn't. So, it may be 27, but I think there's going to be some little bit of toe in the water. As a young guy, would you go see something like that? Would you go watch these guys somewhere?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be so cool. I would watch it for sure. And I feel like a lot of fans would definitely watch it as well. I feel like the only struggle or the only thing that was holding that back was the financial side of things, to obviously make it beneficial for the legend anglers to want to fish it, and or being able to make sure that it's a profitable league, or at least a break-even league, that how all that works. It's not cheap to run a live stream or the TV show or the tournament itself. So, I feel like that was always the struggle. So if somebody could figure out a way to make that profitable for everybody, I feel like that'd be really cool to see. And definitely I would be tuning in for sure.
Well, you got to remember about 15 years ago, something like that, Scott Laney, Jay Kumar, and we ran this thing called the Top Gun Championship. And we took the top 28 anglers and brought them down to Texas, to Eagle Mountain Lake, excuse me. And we had this tournament. Brent Chapman wanted $100,000 to win it, but we fit the bill out of our pockets. They didn't pay an entry fee. They didn't pay for hotel. They didn't pay for meals. We did all that. And what ended up happening was it was a realization that, hey, if we do something like this, this can win. Now this ultimate angler deal, that also proved it. There's more of that kind of one-off type tournaments that might just work in our sport and make it better.
No doubt. The options are out there for sure. And like you said, it's something that hopefully more people will see that and, try and make that happen. Selfishly as an angler, I would love to see more and more and more of that for sure.
Freaking casting.
Well, Matt, it's funny because I watch just about every tournament that comes out. I'm sitting here at my desk working in my office, whatever, and I know there's a tournament going on. I'm watching it, and that's how I first got to recognize what kind of abilities you had. And now to get a set and talk, you got another fan. You got another fan sitting right here. I'm telling you, you do. And I think it's really cool the way you carry yourself. And I think that's important too with our youth. Is let's teach them how to carry themselves, how to work with sponsors, how to do some of that kind of stuff. Because there are a lot of guys that can't talk. They can't get in front of a camera. They can't do any of that stuff. But we can teach them how to do that. And I think that's really important for us to, as part of the arsenal of getting into fishing. It's social media, it's TV, it's everything else. When somebody comes up to talk to you about fishing, don't shy away. You need to talk to them about it. And I think you're an expert at that. And I think that's really cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's kind of stemmed from honestly exactly what you just said there. When I was getting into it and I was coming up, I was as green as can be. I didn't have a clue about anything. If you put a camera in my face, I would choke up. I couldn't even have a conversation with myself, let alone with somebody else. So, that was all stuff that I've kind of learned as I've gone. And, I feel like I kind of owe it back to the sport or to the younger generation to help them out any way I can. And that's always something that I try and do anytime, I can reach out to a younger angler, and always try to reach out to, any rookies coming up to the Bass Pro Tour or to whatever circuit, and just kind of, reach out, introduce myself, and let them know if they need any help or anything. That's something I've always, tried to do. And, I try and do that with my YouTube channel as well. As, it's all about education and helping anglers, catch more fish and learn the behind the scenes stuff like that. And definitely, one of the most asked questions that we get as all pro anglers at any show or anything we do is always asking about the sponsor side of things. And, I always do my best to kind of point them in the right direction and get things started, kind of clear the air a little bit. I feel like there's a lot of misunderstanding as far as that side of things. I think there's a lot of just money and handouts out there just waiting to be gave away to people, but it's not really that way at all. And I always try and do my best to point them in the right direction.
Well, you mentioned it earlier. It's not what they can do for you, it's what you can do for them. And getting engaged with product development, getting engaged with media events, getting engaged with all that kind of stuff, that all is part of it. And I think that what happens sometimes is, hey, man, will you sponsor me? Turns into, what are you going to do for me?
Yeah.
If you don't have the what I can do for you, they're going to look at you and say, that resume is going in file 13. We're not going to do anything with that. You've done a heck of a job of being able to say, not only can I catch them, but then I can talk about it and work with youth and that kind of stuff. And I applaud you for that. I think that's very important, maybe missed by some, but it's not missed by this old guy, because I can tell you it's really important. And I think that, when I started high school fishing in Illinois, everybody thought it was the dumbest thing in the world. Dumbest thing in the world. All you're doing is creating work. We started out, we had about 2,400 kids, right? Well, now we're at 20,000 kids. On 1 week, we have a sectional, then we have a state championship, and people come to that just like they do the classic. I think we hit a mark, and I think that's what we got to continue to do is look for new things, look for, the ability to be able to bring new things to the table. And I think you nailed it in this interview, is that it's not one thing that matters. It's everything that matters.
Yep. It's the whole package for sure. If you want to be a professional angler, you got to be good at, all things, not even talking about the fishing side of things, but definitely all things on the fishing side of things. But you also got to be, good at, podcasts like this, or creating content, videos, social media, talking to, potential sponsors, or just building those relationships with the current sponsors. I mean, you got to be good at all of that stuff to succeed and excel. Much like any other job or business, you got to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of things. You got to be a full-time truck driver as well, fixing your stuff. I mean, there's so many things that go into it. It's not just about the fishing, so much behind the scenes stuff that never really gets seen or talked about. But yeah, like you said, you gotta be good at it all to succeed.
One thing that I failed on, this is my failure, is I wanted to talk about Suzuki a little bit, because I'm watching that company jump in the middle of it and grow. And I hear every day I talk to somebody about Suzuki, and it's kind of like, do you like that engine? Is that a good engine? We had, basically you had Johnson, you had, which is Evan Root Johnson, you had Mercury, and Yamaha came along. now you've got several others, and you look at what Suzuki's doing in the marketplace. The dependability of that engine is really important, and I kind of want to leave with that. Is kind of tell me a little bit about your experience with the Suzuki engine.
Yeah, that was one of the best decisions I've ever made, in my career now is switching to Suzuki. Like that motor is absolutely awesome. It is incredible. Just the dependability, the low end power and torque getting on plane, that's something that, I generally speaking, I'm running and gunning a lot. I'm running a lot of spots, and that motor jumps right up on pad. I have it on a Phoenix. It's a very fast motor. It kind of had a little misconception there where it was a slow motor, but that is absolutely not the case. I've absolutely loved my Suzuki and the ease of use and everything about it. I mean, it is just a well thought out, well built motor. And like you said, everyone you talk to about it, you never hear of any issues or anything. The only issues that I've had have been self-inflicted from, hitting the bottom or bending a prop or something like that. It's never the motor's fault. The only issues have been my fault, and I'll take full blame and responsibility for that, But other than that, I mean, it's incredible. And like I said, it's one of the best things I've ever done is put the Suzuki on the Phoenix, and I plan on running one for as long as I can.
Well, it's kind of funny because we had a show. One of the first shows I did was with another guy that was Suzuki, and he said he checked around asking people, "Hey, you got these on your boats? You got a saltwater boat?" One of the guys had been running a Suzuki. He had 14,000 hours on a Suzuki.
That's insane.
That tells me to start, hey, wait a minute. I'm going to look at this thing. And I'm always digging around looking, and that's what I do all the time is just sit here and try to dig into things and try to find out what things are about. But I think your equipment and all the things that you've mentioned here on this program, that's all things that we have to take into account when we go fishing is that, duplication of rods, duplication of baits, duplication of everything pretty much comes into the mix here. And, Matt, you got a fan here. I'm telling you right now, you do. And I'm excited about this opportunity to get to sit and talk to you. And I sure appreciate you being with us there at All Bass No Bull.
Yeah, definitely appreciate you having me on. Anytime you need someone to talk some fishing, I'll make some time, and definitely appreciate you reaching out. Anytime you want to hop on here, talk some fishing, talk about anything, you let me know.
Well, I can tell you this. The first win you'll get to be the first phone call will be coming from me. I mean, this year.
Sounds good.
You won a bunch, so I'm not worried about that 7 or 8 tournaments, but I'll get you called back, and I appreciate you being with us here at All Bass No Bull.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Oh.